Hayakawa describes this ladder of abstraction. And he talks about how skilled writers, rhetoricians, preachers know how to move on that ladder gracefully, going up and down as they need to, combining both abstraction and concreteness. So my question was, when do preachers know when to step up on that ladder and when to step lower? What's worked for you?
The first thing that comes to my mind is actually a little bit of a disruption of the sort of the dichotomy of the two. I'm thinking of this piece that Janet Burroway wrote on concrete significant detail. And her point is that the details that really make an impact are details that are both concrete and abstract at the same time. In that's what the significant word means, right? Is that it's a concrete detail, but because it's significant, what that means is it signals some abstract idea. It's not just about more and more and more concrete details, it's about the right concrete details to say this larger thing we're needing to say.
The idea of a gleaming detail, something that someone will take away, maybe even everyone will take away, something very concrete and specific. And so in Schindler's List, it's all in black and white, but there's a little girl with a red dress. Or in E.T., there's the scene of them cycling over the full moon. And so there are these critical, what I've heard filmmakers refer to as gleaming details that are so specific that they might, like you say, capture something even bigger.
Even the text we engage, we're seeking some concrete message that we can communicate, and often, particularly when I'm teaching more of the traditional approach, traditional structure that is propositionally based, a lot of that I think undermines, allowing people to experience the mystery of God in the moment of listening and processing messages.
I think of when concepts in theology are really amorphous, so that you need shape or objects attached to them. For example, when Paul talks about the armor of God, he has to give us military detail to know what do each of these things do and how do they function and how do they help the Christian life. So when things are blurry or amorphous, I think it's helpful to have concreteness. That's one of the things I've been trying to think about in terms of my own preaching.
Well, I also think about this. Do you think that it's possible to be so concrete that we end up isolating people? Thinking so specifically about the particulars that apply to one group. And in that process, we isolate, say, the other half of the room in preaching. We're using examples that only appeal to that group, and in that moment, the other group is just clueless, and they don't know what you're talking about. So it's a failed illustration because it doesn't work for them. So how do you find this balance of examples, illustrations that are particular enough that people can feel it and identify with, but it doesn't leave the people who don't understand what you're talking about and feel isolated and just waiting, is a preacher gonna come up with another example or illustration that kind of speaks to my experience? Should there be any moment in preaching where you kind of leave the other audience kind of hanging, waiting for the next example or illustration? Or should every example illustration be connecting with everyone in the room at the same time?
I heard recently a former NFL football player was talking about a hard time in his life, but he began the story this way: when I was laying there weeping in my hyperbaric chamber. And I thought, you weep and I weep, but you have a hyperbaric chamber and I don't.
Yeah.
Right. And so I couldn't really relate to him after that. And so sometimes we have to think about, okay, are our illustrations only geared toward a certain class of people? Are they only geared toward a certain race or ethnicity of people? So I think that's good, and that gets us into some work with contextual concreteness. So in this space right now with this community, what does concreteness look like and sound like? And that was one of the questions, what how might this text be heard by not only this community, but subsets within this community? So that pushes us, I think, it challenges us to do some of that harder work. At the same time, it can be almost self-defeating if we allow ourselves to be trapped by that or disempowered by that, because I think whenever we choose one thing, we're not choosing something else. So it's good for us to be reflective, to be thoughtful, to say, is every illustration the same gender, the same race, the person who looks like me or who looks like them? It's good for us to be reflective in that way, but it's also good for us to say, I'm going to place this before a congregation and push myself over time to grow into these areas.